Now, it's been 4 years since the start of the Syrian conflict and it still rages on. Yasmin Khatun looks at the latest from that stricken country.
Amidst Russia's continued support for Syrian authorities, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bordanov met President Bashar al-Assad in Damascus yesterday. Moscow has long supported Assad supplying arms to regime forces in its 4-year civil war, as well as also trying to restart Syria talks that collapsed in Geneva in February. The 4-year war has a death toll thought to be well over 200,000, with international condemnation of the tactics used by Assad against civilian populations, but trepidation in support for the rebel groups. Rebel fighters are made up of various factions, many often warring with each other. The groups include the Western-backed Free Syrian Army, Al-Qaeda's Front Jabhat al-Nusra, and Islamic State, who declared a caliphate over swathes of land in Iraq and Syria earlier this year. With an ever-growing death toll and a swathing refugee population fleeing to neighbouring countries, now in its 4th year, the Syrian civil war shows no sign of resolution.
Well, joining me to discuss this in the studio is Ali Harfouch, who's a researcher at the Muslim Debate Initiative, visiting from Beirut, Lebanon. And on the line, Abdulaziz Almashi, co-founder of the Syrian Solidarity Movement. Welcome to the programme, both of you. So, Ali, is the US bombing, which I suppose is the major development of the last few months in terms of the military conflict, is that making any difference?
From a military strategic perspective, it has stalled some of the IS advances, some of the advances of ISIS, especially towards Kobani and some of the advances towards Irbid and whatnot. However, in terms of dealing a blow to the infrastructure of the Islamic State, it has not done so. And I don't think that the aim of these airstrikes was to deal a major blow to the Islamic State, in as much as it was an attempt to neutralize the advance of the Islamic State. And I mean, many international leaders have pointed this out, whether it's Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, President Erdogan, and other observers and analysts, and including officials within the White House, that airstrikes alone cannot deal and cannot destroy and degrade, as Obama put it, a group which relies on guerrilla warfare.
Abdulaziz, I mean, there are some stories that the bombing has even acted as a recruiter for the Islamic State. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely, because I mean, many people, many fighters within Syria believe this intervention came to help Assad, not to help the Syrian people. And even the Islamic State, they managed to convince many fighters to join them. They said, look, this is intervention from the outside, and they really managed to get many people to fight on their side. And if you look at the fact, actually, the Islamic State still exists. They are even more powerful than before, and even many people from some areas like Raqqa and northeast Aleppo are supporting them at the moment. I think this intervention makes things worse and make the Islamic State even stronger. And at the end of the day, as a conclusion, this intervention is in favor of Assad and Assad himself only.
Ali, do you agree with that? I mean, you made the point, and I think most people recognise this, that certain military advances by the IS have been halted or partly halted as a result of the bombing, but that on balance it's having a counterproductive effect?
It is having a counterproductive effect in the sense that, as Abdulaziz pointed out, it is creating a backlash, especially among Islamists, and especially in terms of the youth in Syria and in areas such as Raqqa, Jordan, Lebanon, and so forth. People are beginning to realize the increasing polarization between the two camps, between the United States on one hand, and then Iran also joining the strikes. And then you have, Israel also striking Damascus, and then the Islamist camps on the other. So if anything, these airstrikes, right, and they're counterproductive because they're pointing, they're alluding and they're really exposing the polarization which exists, whether it's within the international community or whether it's within in Syria, as I said, between a U.S. agenda in Syria and between the agenda being posited by some of the more Islamic groups in Syria.
Now, you mentioned just there those Israeli airstrikes on Damascus in the past few days. Just give us a bit of background and context for those. What were the Israelis attempting to do and what was the effect?
Well, as of now, we don't really have much reports as to what were the areas struck.
It's
we
badly
know that
underreported attack, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard. We don't really have much information, but we do know that there were some attacks on the Damascus countryside and 2 strikes near the Damascus airport. Reports indicate that they were striking a Hezbollah convoy, an arms convoy that belonged to Hezbollah. But other than that, it would be mere speculation. But they are significant attacks because the attack was carried out near the Damascus airport. So that does indicate something about Israel being emboldened, having a more emboldened position towards the Syrian conflict.
Abdulaziz, what effect does that Israeli intervention, or military intervention, what effect does that have on people on the ground, do you think?
Well, I think this has no effect at all because I don't think Assad in a state of war with Israel. Israel have violated the Syrian airspace many times. They have targeted many, even military bases within Syria, and still there is no reaction to this violation. But as your guest mentioned, according to the Israelis, they targeted some armed convoys to the militia of Hezbollah, which I doubted. So basically, I don't think this is in the favor of the Syrian revolution. Even Assad's media, they said that kind of a strike is to help the terrorists within Syria, and they straight away just link it to the Syrian revolutionaries.
Ali, if, as we've been saying, this isn't really resolving the question, if it looks like to many people that the American airstrikes are benefiting, if not directly coordinated with the regime, what are the prospects of any end in sight?
At the moment, there are no prospects of end in sight. Like I said, because the military steps being taken by the international coalition are not sufficient or adequate in bringing an end, whether it's to ISIS or to toppling Assad regime. As a matter of fact, toppling Assad regime is not even on the agenda. And we know this because in December 3, you had the anti-ISIS coalition in Brussels, the NATO meeting. And we look at the final closing statement, right? Removing Assad was not on the agenda. And without not removing Assad, quite simply translate into the conflict being protracted and being extended into the future. That's one. 2, in terms of dealing with the Islamic State, we will not be able to deal with the Islamic State, whether it's the international coalition or as a Muslim community, until you have some sort of relative stability or some sort of political narrative in the region. And you can't have that political narrative, an all-inclusive political narrative, with the presence of Bashar al-Assad. So long as the United States is carrying out these airstrikes against ISIS without putting together a coherent strategy for removing Bashar al-Assad, it's not only going to be counterproductive, but it's going to throw Syria into a much longer abyss of conflict.
Do you think this really means that if there's going to be any movement, it's going to be on the Iraqi side of the border, not on the Syrian side of the border?
It would have to be on both, because the stronghold of the Islamic State is in Raqqa. And this is what many White House officials have been saying, whether it's Chuck Hagel, Robert Ford, Hillary Clinton, ex-White House officials. Chuck Hagel is, of course, the Secretary of Defense. They've been saying that if you want to attack, if you want to strike the Islamic State, then you have to shift the battle into Syria. And this is exactly what the United States does not want to do. And like I said, this is also very clear from the United States, the statements of John Kerry during the anti-ISIS coalition, that they do not want to embroil themselves into the Syrian conflict. They want to focus on the Islamic State in Iraq because they know that if they were to shift the focus into Syria, they would not have anything to draw upon. They have no support base in Syria. The moderate rebels have been driven out of Idlib. So in reality, they have no playing cards. So it's really the United States trying to choose the best between 2 evils, either embarrassing themselves in Syria, right? Because as I said, they have no allies on the ground, or continuing to push for nominal solutions in Iraq, which, as I said, is also going to lead to a cycle of failure and violence.
I mean, and Abdulaziz, one of the kind of questions left hanging there is whether or not there can be an increase in military deployment. Several senior military figures in the United States, most of them retired, it has to be said, but senior figures nevertheless have been calling for more troops and so forth and so on. But given that the bombing itself is, as you say, counterproductive, wouldn't the deployment of more force by the US be even more counterproductive?
Well, I don't think the airstrikes can finish off the Islamic State at the end of the day. And I don't even think the Americans going to send the troops on the ground. Maybe they will do at some point in the future. But even I don't think they are even serious to finish off ISIS like very soon. Because if you look at John Kerry, just a few days ago, he was asking the Congress like to support the campaign against ISIS for at least 3 years from now. And yesterday, another spokesman from the White House, he said we won't be able to start the training and offering the Syrian opposition with weapons until next spring. So I don't think they are really serious about the war even against ISIS. It is just like there is some of maybe coordination with Assad himself, because for the last week, both the coalition and Assad targeted Raqqa, and more than 210 civilian people were killed by Assad air forces. And we don't really know what's going on under the table. There must be some coordination between the regime and between the U.S. And to be honest, like everything is in the favor of the regime. When I look at the situation in Syria at the moment, like the only thing in the agenda is to keep Assad in power, not even to finish off ISIS.
Ali, do you think that what might happen here, which would break, because what we seem to be saying is that none of the options are going to result in any fundamental shift in the thing. Now, one of the BBC correspondents, Mark Mardell, wrote a piece saying, well, actually, what might happen is that the sort of areas under ISIS control revolt against them, that the nature of their rule is such as to produce a reaction. Might that be one place?
I highly doubt that would happen. Whether it's based on our contacts with people living in Raqqa and areas of ISIS control, I can tell you that these people prefer the rule of ISIS, despite its brutality, the rule of ISIS over the rule of some of the corrupt elements in the FSA, unfortunately. And this is the same US-backed FSA. And of course, they would prefer ISIS to Assad. And the reason for that is that ISIS does provide a relative sense of security and stability. They are brutal, right? But they do provide the stability that Syrians, especially in the east and in the north, have been looking for the past, as of 2011. So I highly doubt that there would be any coordinated uprising. When we did see uprisings with some of the tribes in Deir ez-Zur, the Shi'ite tribe, the Islamic State executed 700 men belonging to the Shi'ite tribe, which is about 40, the population of which is 40,000. So they would not do so out of, as a sort of authoritarian bargain, like, okay, we will trade off our rights for a sense of stability, and out of fear.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your commentary, Abdulaziz. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, that's it for the second part of the show. But after the break, we'll be looking at the continuing plight of refugees fleeing from Syria, as Western governments this week have pledged to take in more. Stay with us.